Welcome to the Masonic Authors Guild International, where each week two historians review and critique books and other publications focused on Freemasonry, as well as discuss broader issues in historical research. The Guild members are Robert Cooper, Curator Emeritus of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, who lives in Edinburgh, and Mark Tabbert, former Curator at the George Washington Masonic National Memorial, Alexandria, Virginia, who lives in Iowa. Both Guild members have published significant academic historical research and have contributed to the Masonic journals and magazines. Together, they have over 65 years as Freemasons and are members of numerous Masonic research societies and lodges in Europe and North America. The Masonic Authors Guild International's mission, as well as these podcasts, is to promote the highest professional and academic standards in Masonic research, education, and publications. These podcasts begin with the Guild's mission by reviewing those that do or do not uphold the highest academic standards and explain why they do or do not. We Magi are proud to be supported by Amity, the only app where you can find a lodge around the world. Look for our podcasts in Amity's media section.
Along with Masonic-related book reviews, the Masonic Authors Guild periodically feels the need to review the foundational practices necessary for high-quality historical research or broader issues in understanding the history of Freemasonry. Any study of the past, or indeed any systematic or scientific research, requires evidence, and in today's episode, we review the three types of historical sources: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Before we provide high-quality and low-quality examples of each type, here is each type defined in Wayne C. Booth et al.'s book, The Craft of Research, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2008. Primary sources are materials containing direct evidence, first-hand testimony, or an eyewitness account of a topic or event under investigation that provide the raw data for research. Examples of sources are diaries, correspondence, photographs, and published first-hand accounts. Secondary sources use primary data to solve research problems, such as scholarly books and articles, and tertiary sources are books or articles that synthesize and report on secondary sources for general readers, such as textbooks, encyclopedia articles, and Wikipedia.
Solid research requires the use of all three types of sources. Primary sources provide the raw data, but they also require tertiary sources such as encyclopedias, dictionaries, subject guides, and other reference tools for background information and to identify the people, places, dates, and organizations. Secondary sources, such as books, scholarly journals, and newspaper articles, synthesize current research and help place events and people into their historical context. This is important as there is no such thing as the definitive history of any subject. The present is always reinterpreting the past to fit its own needs and perspective. New generations of scholars develop new approaches to understanding the past, and of course, more information and sources are always being discovered. An obvious example of this is determining the origins of Freemasonry. Countless theories are continually offered, starting with Adam in the Garden of Eden. There was once a time when Freemasons were credited with forming the medieval Knights Templars. Nowadays, many argue that it was the Templars that created Freemasonry. Up until recently, most Masonic scholars were convinced Freemasonry was created by the English in England. Recent scholarship, however, increasingly points to Scotland and even Ireland more than England as the craft's birth. These new interpretations happen as historians find new primary source materials, both within repositories and online. For this episode, we Magi will compare two Masonic books, one written by an academic historian who relies on primary sources but also uses the other two, and another written by a self-styled historian who fails to use all three sources correctly. Both books will be reviewed in future Magi episodes. The first book is Stephen C. Bullock's 1996 Revolutionary Brotherhood, Freemasonry and the Transformation of the American Social Order, 1730 to 1840. And the second book is Stephen Knight's 1984 The Brotherhood, The Secret World of the Freemasons. Later in the podcast, I will provide an example of Bullock's use of primary and secondary sources, but there are several steps academic level books usually take before they are published. Typically, academic books are the result of a student's doctoral thesis, which means the topic was approved by the academic advisor even before being undertaken. This also means the advisor reviews the student's research and draft manuscripts. Lastly, before a student is awarded a doctoral degree, his or her dissertation is critiqued by at least 2 other professors. If the newly minted doctor of history is so motivated to have his or her dissertation published, then the publisher will employ professional proofreaders, fact checkers, and editors to ensure the manuscript meets the highest standards. Every endnote, citation, and source will be double checked to ensure the correct use of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources.
As Mark has explained, an historian uses sources for research, and that sources fall into 3 categories: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Academic historians frequently seek out material which has never been used before, and this constitutes original research. Such research is intended to produce a narrative of the past that is new, or which constitutes another alternative explanation of some aspect of the past which has already been written about. It is impossible to write about everything that occurred in the past. An historian, therefore, narrows the focus to a particular theme, such as a period, person, or event. There are exceptions where the historian will deal with a very large subject, such as a century, a war, a country, or the life of a particular individual. Even when a large subject is researched, it always investigates specific aspects, such as a battle, an economic crisis, or the important events in the life of a particular leader. This is intended to shed light on the bigger picture. In other words, the author provides in-depth examples of a particular period, person, etc., to give a better understanding of the larger subject. The sources that a writer uses and how they are written and presented can provide an insight to the standard of his or her work. The first thing I do with a new history book is to look at the bibliography. This gives me a rough idea of the extent of the author's use of secondary sources. I then look for footnotes or endnotes. If there are none, or they are sparse, I become wary. I then check the index. If there is no index, I become even more suspicious. An index is important because it gives some idea as to the depth of research undertaken for the book. If, for example, it is a biography, then I look to see the person's name and number of subjects relating to that person. These should be shown after the name with the relevant page numbers. These entries ought to show details of places, people, and events about the person about whom the book is written. If a name is followed by only a list of page numbers, this is another small clue as to the standard of research and the quality of writing. One must remember, however, that the author may not be responsible for creating the index. The last item are photographs and other images, which are included in the book. Do they have captions? Are they relevant to the subject matter of the book? And do they illustrate a particular point being made by the author? I usually assess the use of images by referring to the index to see if there is a direct connection between the images and the subjects mentioned. Lastly, are the images of good quality, obtained from a reputable source, such as a museum, library, or other institution, and are those sources provided? If there are many images used, a thoughtful writer will include notes on images, but whilst useful, is not essential. These comments are not, of course, restricted only to biographies, but apply to all media about history. But this is the method I have adopted for all books of a historical nature. This is only my method. I am sure that others will have their own ways of assessing books, papers, or articles. All these clues provide a general overview of a book, but even after looking at these parts of a book, this is only an initial rough assessment. It is only after reading the book in full can firm conclusions be reached. In the next part of the podcast, Mark and I will compare the same 2 books and try and illustrate these points.
Now we shall look at 2 examples, one excellent and one pitifully bad, in the use of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Stephen C. Bullock's 1996 Revolutionary Brotherhood is 319 pages of text divided into 4 parts containing 10 chapters. The book contains 97 pages of endnotes that begin with the 4-page, quote, note on Masonic sources, unquote, introduction. A quick count by chapter totals to 774 endnotes for the entire book. Just one example demonstrates Bullock's rigor. On page 53, he details the Philadelphia Freemasons' 1755 parade and ceremony to open the first Masonic Hall in America. The full citation for just that one long paragraph reads, First, a diary is cited. Mrs. Conway Robertson Howard, editor, quote, extracts from the diary of Daniel Fisher, 1775, unquote. The Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, 1893, page 273. Second, a newspaper is cited, the Pennsylvania Gazette, Philadelphia, June 26, 1755. Third, a book on Benjamin Franklin is cited, Franklin Bicentenary, page 141 to page 148. Fourth, a sermon that was preached after the dedication is cited, William Smith, quote, a sermon preached in Christ Church, Philadelphia, the 24th of June, 1755, unquote, published in Philadelphia, 1755. Lastly, Bullock adds context by mentioning first, quote, the London Grand Lodge did not have its own building until 1776, unquote, then refers to John Hamill's book, The Craft, A History of English Freemasonry, published London, 1986. And second, Hamill also discusses English Masonic processions on page 83 to 84. In short, Bullock hits the reader 12 ways from Sunday with proof over a significant Masonic event, but one that is not fundamental to his history.
When I picked up Knight's book, The Brotherhood, I followed my usual procedure. Is there an index? Yes. A bibliography? Yes, a short one. Footnotes? No. The author claims that the book investigates the influence of Freemasonry in various parts of society, particularly the police and judiciary. Instead of citing sources, Knight quotes them directly in the text of the book. These sources come nowhere near what is expected from an historian. Critical comments come from unnamed sources such as, quote, a past master told me, close quote, or, quote, a senior Freemason explained, close quote. Where sources are named, the information comes from material that is already in the public domain, such as the magazine The Police, which is available to all police officers. Very early on, the author reveals his shortcomings, where he states, quote, under the Secret Societies Act 1799, Freemasons are permitted to hold meetings only if yearly returns providing names, addresses, etc. are submitted to local clerks of the peace. This is rarely done, so most gatherings in Masonic lodges are held in breach of this law, close quotes. However, this law was repealed in 1967 under the Statute Law Revisions Act, which did away with many obsolete acts of Parliament. As Knight's book was published in 1984, almost 30 years after this law was abolished, it shows the quality of his research, which is poor to say the least. He does a disservice to his profession as a journalist.
In closing, please remember primary source materials contain direct evidence, first-hand testimony, or an eyewitness account of a topic or event under investigation. Secondary sources are typically used to solve research problems, and tertiary sources are books or articles that synthesize and report on secondary sources. When considering reading a Masonic history book, please first look for a bibliography and see how many entries come from primary sources, archives, and how many secondary sources are published by university presses. Check to see if the book has a substantial endnotes and a detailed index. Otherwise, you might be bitten by a charlatan's wolf in sheep's historical clothing.
Farewell from us Magi, good luck and Godspeed. This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use the information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's property, as are all the opinions and information it presents. Robert L.D. Cooper's, Mark A. Tabert's, and any other speaker's views and opinions within the podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, or Tabert will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you happen to suffer an inconvenience due to the information contained herein.